Hello and welcome to Battlestar Galacticast. He's Matt, I'm Nat, and let's get started on our special theories episode.
So yeah, hopefully this episode will help everyone, including us, get through 2 weeks with no Battlestar Galactica, thanks to the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
You guys have been pouring in some very interesting theories across the board, be it from VO.com, on MySpace, on BSGcast.com. We've gotten some really interesting feedback and ideas from you guys. Stiff Jimmy gave us the idea that Cavill might have contact with the Final Five, which is kind of interesting because he's the one who tells Deanna Beers that, no, you cannot see those faces. It's not to say that he can't see those faces.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Another interesting one, well, Satsuki had a lot to say, but one of the ones that we kind of like to point out is the idea that, do the Final Five even resurrect? And if they do, where would that happen? Because it's clearly not on the resurrection ship.
Yeah, they're Cylons, and so far one of the quintessential things about Cylons is they have no fear of death because they don't die. They come back, they resurrect, their souls keep coming back. And
so if these Final Five resurrect,
where do they do
it?
If they resurrect, it can't be on the resurrection ship, or else, you know, you'd have a bunch of sixes walking around wondering why you have
extra, whoever, it's Ds.
Yeah, a bunch of Ds or Baltars kicking around the resurrection ship.
Yeah.
So obviously, they don't resurrect with the rest of them. So where do they? Interesting question.
If they do.
And Amanda had some interesting things to say.
Right. Amanda had an interesting theory, which is something that I kind of thought about as well, where it shows a parallel between their universe and a Judeo-Christian type of dogma, I guess, in the sense that the Cylons are essentially the Christians with the one God, and the humans are, I guess, the Jews who need to be saved, and Hera is the Messiah. And basically the Jews have to choose whether to believe in, I guess, the message of the Messiah, which is Hera, and choose to live happily with the Cylons or be condemned, which is interesting.
Very interesting theories across the board from everyone, which was quite cool.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, one of the main issues of Battlestar Galactica is who are these Final Five? Who else could be a Cylon?
Oh yeah, and we got a lot of theories from you guys as to who would be Cylons as well, which we should kind of go over.
Yeah, one overarching important facet is that we had a cool episode this season that helps us figure out who is a Cylon and who isn't. Now, assuming that the Final Five are susceptible to the plague that all the other Cylons are, we eliminated a lot of people in the episode Measure of Salvation.
Right.
Because Lee, Coddle, Hilo, Adama, Gata, Hot Dog, and Racetrack were all exposed to the virus.
To Simon, right.
And none of them got it. Now you might say, well, they weren't all on the ship at the same time, but there was that moment when everyone was basically grilling Simon. Simon was infected. If the main issue is that this infection spreads to other Cylons, there's your opportunity.
Yeah, someone in there, if they were a Cylon, we're assuming would have gotten this disease as well.
They should have. Now, it's interesting because in the previous scene, Roslyn is discussing this issue with Adama. And in the next scene, when Simon shows up, Roslyn's gone. So that's a little weird. You know, it's possible Ronald D. Moore hasn't even considered how many people were in that room.
Right, maybe.
And this is all just us being too big of fans. But, you know, Roslyn wasn't there, Ty wasn't there.
D, Zarek.
And Zarek, of course, wasn't there.
Are the main ones.
And, of course, Billy was dead by then, but that's not to say he's not a Cylon.
Right.
And, of course, Baltar was not exposed to the virus, as far as we can tell. He was wearing a biosuit, essentially, when he walked in there, a self-contained suit. So he was not exposed to the virus. So it's still safe to say that, you know, maybe he did die in that blast back on Caprica. And when Caprica 6 sheltered him with her frame of flesh, could that really stop a nuclear blast from blowing you to pieces? Probably not. So, you know, he also had a lot of sex with 6, we assume. And no baby happened. No baby happened. So maybe it's because he is a Cylon.
Exactly.
She just didn't know.
Another interesting theory that we have been bouncing around is this whole coincidence with numbers. There are 12 colonies,
12 Lords of Cobol,
12 Cylon models, and what does it all mean?
Now, Ronald D. Moore has said in podcasts and commentaries that the 12 Cylons are not clones. They're the 12 archetypes of humans, that the Cylons took a look at us and said, oh, look, there's 12 of you. Now, humans have also done that, and we call that the Zodiac.
Right, exactly. So I guess, each of the Cylon models are supposed to be one of the Zodiac symbols, and if you look at the 12 colonies, they're named after, derivative of the Zodiac. So, we have Gemini and Caprica, all these kind of things. And if we make this association, there are 2 Cylon Models, which are symbolic of twins, which also happen to be the symbol for Gemini, the twins.
Now, the argument against that is that, but there's like hundreds of everybody.
Right.
But you'll think there's only one real Leoben. There's only one real Deanna Beers. There's only one Caprica 6.
Prominent, yeah.
You know, each one of these characters, Ronald D. Moore has not put together 2 or 4 or 8 sixes that are important. Only one.
Only one.
Now, you'll notice that Sharon's is the only one
model that
has two prominent versions
characters
of that model.
Which is safe to say that they're the twins.
Gemini. There you go.
Gemini.
Now, Caprica.
Exactly. Caprica would be, I guess, Caprica 6.
6.
Now, this is not to say that this is where they're from necessarily. I mean, like, Sharon isn't necessarily from Gemini, but it's just saying that it's the archetype, right? That's the archetype.
That there's some
colony, that their
representation there.
And then there's, of course, Leoben, who, if you
just from his name,
would be Leo.
So that leaves 9 more. So if you guys have any ideas of what Doral might be, who Simon might be, I mean, we don't even know Simon's number, we don't know Cavill's number, we don't know Leoben's number. But it would be interesting to see what you guys think about who each of those archetypes might be, based on their personality or their names. What do you think? One thing that Nat may not necessarily agree with me, mostly because I think because you find it a bit of a stretch.
It's you listen to it and you let me know. It's a little. I mean, it makes sense. Let him get to it. Anyway,
okay. So, the idea of a cycle is pretty predominant in the colonial faith. The idea that things happen and then they rehappen and then they rehappen, and even
as was pointed out most clearly by Leoben.
Leoben in Flesh and Bone, first season, we've got him saying things like, all of this has happened before, all of it will happen again. This has all been written. Players change, but the story remains the same.
Exactly, and the destinies and all that kind of stuff. He seems to know something.
Yeah,
apparently.
and Leoben said that Cobalt is the birthplace of us all, but we know that the Cylons were made on the colonies, in the 12 colonies. So for him to believe that he was born on Cobalt is very interesting, because the Cylons were made by man, but then after violence, they were cast out, which is very similar to what happened to the Lords of Cobalt and man. Their relationship that was so peaceful and beautiful, all of a sudden, violence, cast out. So we have that sort of change of relationship where 12 lords cast out man, and then you have man casting out 12 Cylons. Now, they weren't 12 Cylons yet, but they became that. So it's a creator casting out what they've created, and it seems to repeat. Now, there's an obvious correlation between the two religions. The Oracle in Exodus 1 shows that that was the case. The final 5 for the Cylons and the 5 priests in colonial faith.
Points out.
Obviously related. So at this point, you have to ask the question...
The two dogmas overlap.
Yeah, if they overlap...
How related?
And where did the Cylon DNA come from? They're not clones, we've established.
Right, they're the archetypes, but even then, they seem human, they look human, so clearly they must be made of
something.
Some sort of DNA.
Now, if the Lords of Cobalt existed, what was their DNA? And where did they get it? If God, whatever that is, created the Lords of Cobalt, and then the Lords of Cobalt are essentially reincarnated
through the 12 Cylon models.
Exactly. So it's the idea that God created the Lords of Cobalt, that created man, that then created
Cylons.
the Cylons, which are a reincarnation of the Lords of Cobalt. So that's my theory. The idea that all of this has happened and all of this is happening again.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when Leoben says that, maybe last time, Starbuck, I was the one torturing you. Well, maybe he was. Maybe Leoben, in whatever form, was
the Cobalt God.
Yeah, whatever Cobalt God he was, maybe he was torturing a reincarnation of Starbuck, a version of Starbuck from 2,000 years ago when that violence happened on Cobalt. Maybe that's exactly what he was talking about. And he seems to be the spiritual one who can feel the current without being washed away by it.
I wonder which one of the 12 Cobalt gods he would have been.
It's an interesting question. Anyway, that's my theory. So if...
like I said, it was a little extreme, but you can see the relationship.
It's got a basis. It's thin, I agree. But I think it's going somewhere, and I guess we'll find out more.
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to have an episode of Battlestar Galactica to talk about.
Yay!
So we'll be sure to go back to our regular programming. Fan of the week, we've got someone in mind.
Yeah, you guys actually didn't think it was lame, so that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, we got some pretty good feedback. So yeah, there you go. Next week should be a good one. Looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks for watching, guys, and keep your feedback coming in. Yay! Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Nat.
Bye.
Bye-bye.